Good evening, history students. Thanks for sending in your comments and questions, those of you that did. And let's take a look at what you guys had to say. So, about whether or not Canada is a peaceful country. Let's see. I think Canada is a peaceful country because it has about nice things and no people can come and desire war. Okay. That's a good start of an answer, right? You know, it's a good sentiment, right? We can think about why that is, right? We definitely have that reputation around the world, right? Everyone thinks Canada's the peaceful country, it's nice, there's no war here, right? And the reason people think that is because, you know, we are a peacekeeper nation, right? That's sort of what we are. Let's see what this other person say. For the most part, yes, somewhat. Canada is a peaceful country, but doesn't want to be in a position like they were in World War I and World War II ever again, and it shows. I believe that Canada's already made up their minds that they will never fight again, but they have been a part of the wars in Lebanon, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Afghanistan, so Canada's not too peaceful. So they are part of it, but not fully, only in a helpful way, which is healthy for us. In the long run, it will benefit us. This is a good answer, right? I agree very much with this person. We have been in wars, right? It's not like Canada hasn't ever gone to war in the last 50 years, right? Lebanon, Rwanda, Bosnia, Afghanistan, all of those are, you know, wars that Canada participated in, right? But they are as peacekeepers, right? So if you look at each of those wars, except for the Somalia war, which we'll talk about next week, Lebanon, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Afghanistan, right? Canada does not actually kill very many people in any of those wars, right? Canada is essentially serving as a peacekeeper, right? Which is more akin to being a policeman than into a soldier, right? So in terms of what we do in those wars, even when we participate, it's not as a particularly offensive capability. Let's see what this other person wrote. Yes, in my opinion, Canada is one of the most peaceful countries in the world because Canada clearly showed in the Cold War, 1953 to 1963, it's longer than that, it's right up until 1989, that Canada has the ability to support itself and other countries. For example, Canada helped 5 countries, Afghanistan, Somalia, Lebanon, Rwanda, and Bosnia. Right. So again, the Somalia one, we'll talk about that. That one did not go well. That's actually, you know, not something Canada is proud of, right? The others were relatively better, right? But Somalia, ooh, we'll talk about that next week. Anyway, Canadians have sent peacekeeping operations now. The idea for the first time in our history does not side with the British instead. This illustration shows that Canada is not a needed country and can make better decisions from themselves. We can make our country better by our own ability and decision. Also, the outcome result of our own ideas made Canada have peaceful and multicultural freedom, free education, economic development, free healthcare, etc. Better economy for the country and the world. We are a multicultural country in the world and have free religious practice and traditions, while not all countries of the world have, which not all countries of the world had. Today, Canadians have lots of freedom, which made Canada one of the most peaceful places to live in the world. Yeah, I would agree with this. This is a very strong answer, and it is one of the things that Canada is proud of, right? We have had peacekeeping operations, but we don't go around the world fighting and, you know, invading others or stealing things or anything like that. We just focus on ourselves. It's peaceful and it is nice. So very good answers so far. Guys, I would love to hear more, right? These are good answers. Everyone who sent it in, great answer. I want more of you to do it, right? So remember, you can make it nice and short, just like the first one I got here, right? And just send me some answers and I will be happy to give you credit here. I've also got some questions. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so first question for tonight. I feel that other countries like America, Soviet Union, and even China show stronger qualities and they will pursue what they want for their country. I'm not saying what they're doing is good. Trump is a ruthless pit bull, and I just wonder if Canada is left in the back of things, making us look kind of weak. Well, the reality is, Canada is not as strong militarily as any of those 3 countries. By the way, Soviet Union is now Russia, right? So let's just put Russia there. So, you know, we're certainly not as strong as America, we're not as strong as the Soviet Union, and we're definitely not strong as strong as China, right? And the reason for that sort of you can look at as just, as a result of population, right? If you look at the population of the U.S., right, it's, 32.7 million. Meanwhile, we in Canada here are 37.5 million, right? So there are literally 10 times more Americans as there are Canadians, right? So, of course, we're not going to be as militarily strong as them, right? Same goes for Russia, same goes for China. So Canada is what we call middle power. Let me put that over here. Canada is a middle power, right? Meaning that we have an army, and that army, it has good equipment, it has modern stuff, everything like that, but it's not a particularly big army, and we're not really out to fight anyone, right? There's no aggressive Canadian war that's been fought in the last, 60 years, since World War II, right? So Canada is very much a middle power, and certainly you have cases where we do get bullied, right? That's a reality. Some of you who are watching the news today might have heard about the fact that Americans, specifically Donald Trump, is trying to steal a bunch of masks that we ordered for our country that we need to fight this terrible virus, right? The N95 masks that are necessary for that fight. And the reason he thinks he can do that is because Canada isn't as militarily strong as America, right? So that's reality. They are 10 times bigger than us, just in terms of their population. Now, that doesn't mean that we as Canada are helpless, though, right? We have enormous natural resources and everything like that, right? So we are able to, promote our own power in different ways, right? And, we are going to get those masks back, for instance, by suing these people, right? And pursuing legal means, right? So even though we don't have much of an army, right, certainly not compared to the United States, that doesn't mean that we are just completely helpless. But very good question. The second question I had here is, why did the US and Canada leave South Vietnam in 1975 and let North Vietnam win that war? Okay, so two things here. First of all, Canada was not part of the Vietnam War. I will emphasize this over and over. Canada did not participate in the Vietnam War, right? So that is a mistake. That was the Americans that did that. Canada did not send any soldiers there. No Canadian soldiers participated. That was an American thing, right? In fact, what was happening during the Vietnam War is a lot of Americans would flee up to Canada and live here for a while in order to avoid the draft, right? So Canada had Americans running to live up here, right, in order to avoid being conscripted into the American army to fight in Vietnam, right? So let's make that part very, very clear when we talk about Vietnam. Now, if you're asking about the war in Vietnam and why the northern Vietnamese Ho Chi Minh won, that's sort of a big question. If I were to answer it now properly, I would probably be talking for an hour. So let me try to make this nice and simple. The Americans could not defeat the northern Vietnamese because they were not giving up, right? That's point number one. They were not giving up on the fight, right? And they were well supplied by the Soviets and the Chinese, right? Throughout the Vietnam War, which was a very terrible war where the Americans killed scores of Vietnamese people and poisoned the environment with chemicals, right? They knew all along that the northern Vietnamese fighters, the Viet Cong, serving under a man called Ho Chi Minh, was receiving guns and weapons and supplies from the Soviets and the Chinese. But it's not like the Americans could do anything about it, right? Because if they bombed the Soviet supply ships or the Chinese supply ships, then they could cause nuclear war, right? So it was very much an unwinnable war, right, for the Americans, because as long as the northern Vietnamese did not give up, which they absolutely would not, and as long as the Soviets and the Chinese were supplying them, then they could fight forever, right? And this meant that the Americans had no way to actually win the war. And so eventually, when President Richard Nixon was in office, they gave up, right? They said, all right, well, this is too hard, we can't do it. And essentially the Americans retreated from Vietnam in defeat, and after that the northern Vietnamese were easily able to conquer the southern Vietnamese, who were being supported by the Americans. So that's the story of the Vietnam War in a nutshell. There's a lot more detail to it than that, but that's about as best as I can do for this moment. Okay, so that concludes the question period for today. So tomorrow I'll be posting something new about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I hope you guys are having a good evening. Wash your hands, stay inside, and I'll see you tomorrow.